welcome to the debate right here at Press TV. I'm Marcia Hashemi. Well, would a thief steal right in front of the police? Would a murderer kill someone in front of a judge and expect to get away with it? Then why would the Syrian government invite international investigators to their country and then use the chemical weapons while they are there? What is looking more and more similar to the WMD lie, which was a pretext for invading and occupying Iraq, the world may be about to witness another Western and petrodollar-backed war based on a lie. Stay with us as we take a look at the latest from the Syrian scenario.
Few days have passed since the Syrian opposition accused the government of Bashar al-Assad of launching a chemical attack in the suburbs of the capital, Damascus. However, new reports by the Syrian TV say that the army soldiers have found chemical agents in militant-held tunnels in the Damascus suburb of Jabar. Some Western countries continue to accuse the Syrian government of being responsible for the attack. Washington has already started considering military options against Damascus, and U.S. media reports say that the Pentagon is making initial preparations for a cruise missile attack on Syrian government forces. Washington has bolstered its Navy presence in the eastern Mediterranean and moved its warships closer to Syria. This all comes at a time when no investigation has been conducted and no evidence has been found to prove that the Syrian government had any role in the chemical attack. France has also called for a reaction with force if it's confirmed that the Assad government was behind what it called a chemical massacre.
All of the information at our disposal converge to indicate there was a chemical massacre in Syria close to Damascus and to indicate that the regime of Bashar Assad was the source of it.
Britain went as far as directly accusing the Syrian government of carrying out the attack. Iran has warned against any foreign military intervention in Syria, saying that there's no international mandate for any such intervention. Tehran says there's evidence that the attack was carried out by foreign-backed insurgents. Russia also rejects claims that the Syrian government was behind the alleged deadly chemical attack. Moscow says there's growing evidence that the Syrian rebels were behind the attack and described the allegation as a provocation aimed at undermining peace efforts in Syria.
The biased regional media immediately, as if on demand, began an aggressive information attack, placing the responsibility for the attacks on Assad's government. All of this can only suggest that we are dealing with a pre-planned provocation.
The clearest evidence would, however, come from a team of UN experts already in Damascus at an invitation of the Syrian government. UN envoy Angela Kane has arrived in Damascus to press for an investigation into the alleged chemical weapons attack. U.S. President Barack Obama had threatened Damascus with military intervention after a deadly gas attack killed nearly 30 people in the Syrian town of Khan al-Assal back in March. A Russian investigation found that Western-backed militants were behind the attack. Obama said at the time that the use of chemical weapons would cross a red line. But now it seems that the U.S. and its allies are pushing for a military intervention in Syria.
Of course they want an intervention. They've been humiliated by the success of the Assad government and the Syrian people who do not want this Takfiri, blood-stained Sharia imposed on them.
Well, I'd like to welcome my guest to the program, author and historian, Mr. Webster Griffin Tarpley out of Washington, and investigative journalist, Mr. Lee Kaplan out of Berkeley, California. Welcome, both of you. To the program, I'd like to start off in Berkeley, actually, with Mr. Kaplan. What do you make of the timing of this attack? Because actually, this attack actually came on the year anniversary of U.S. President Barack Obama's speech about his red lines for Syria.
What do I make of the attack? Well, what I'd have to say is
the timing of the attack. The timing of the attack.
The time. I don't think there's any good timing for the attack. This attack, though, was definitely from Assad's regime. Maher Assad, who is the general in charge of the 5th Brigade that handles chemical weapons there in Syria, is the one who's in charge of chemical weapons there in Syria. The area in Damascus where civilians were attacked by the poison gas was coming under control of the Free Syrian Army. And it was just getting a little too close for comfort. There are 3 depots where the Syrian government keeps these chemical weapons, and they are only released with direct command from the Assad family, specifically Maher Assad and Bashir Assad. And another reason I think that the attack occurred on this date or this time, as you're putting it, is I do believe that Syria being a proxy of Iran, this is a test to see what they can get away with in terms of conflicts, in terms of reintroducing chemical warfare onto the battlefield.
Okay,
this is
well, let me get Mr. Tarpley in on this discussion. Mr. Tarpley, what would the Syrian government have to gain by using chemical weapons on its own people at this time?
Well, let me say, first of all, there is absolutely no proof that the Syrian government did this. Indeed, it seems to me the suspicion goes the other way. I would endorse the statement of the Russian Foreign Ministry. It has all of the earmarks of a carefully pre-planned provocation by this terrorist opposition in Syria, the so-called death squads, and they need it because they're losing. Since the fall of Qusair on the 5th of June, we've had key neighborhoods in Homs that have been liberated by the Syrian government. We've had the rebels really in full retreat the whole summer. It has been a very grim military panorama for them. They've tried to balance that by making little sallies near Latakia. The Latakia front has now been shut down again by the Syrian army and some other areas. But generally speaking, the rebels have been in a kind of a slow motion rout. So they are desperately depending on foreign intervention. They need the United States to pull their chestnuts out of the fire. Without U.S. intervention, they're doomed. So everybody knows with this red line stuff going on, the only way you can get the United States to start bombing Syria is to mount a fake provocation. And I would refer people to the Voltaire Network website, where we have these indications that the film was posted on YouTube before the so-called incident was supposed to have taken place. And if you look at the internal evidence in these films, you'll see that there are many things that seem strange. For example, some of the victims don't show the symptoms of sarin poisoning. I won't go into this now because it's quite graphic. But if you go and look at the symptoms of somebody dying of sarin, you'll see that there are some very messy ones that are not shown in any of these films. Okay, well, Mr. Kaplan, tell me, why do you think the Syrian government would do such an attack at this time when there are international investigators actually on the ground in Damascus?
Well, the international investigators have just come on the ground, but the fact of the matter is intelligence circles in the West, the United States, the French, they have intelligence listening posts, they have other information. They have determined that this came from the depots that I explained to you in Syria. To say that why would Assad attack his own people? Well, he is a dictator and he's a fascist, and if it's to his benefit to do so, he will do so. Well, even a dictator, let's say even a dictator and a fascist, Mr. Kaplan, let me just jump in here. Even a dictator or a fascist, as you said, we would think that there would be a certain amount of logic behind that, that if you want to do something, you wouldn't do it in front of international observers. Well, again, I'm trying to explain to you, you interrupted me there. The United States and the Jordanians have troops massed on the Syrian border who are anti-Assad forces, Syrians who have been trained, who are ready to go in and fight on the ground, boots on the ground. And one of the ideas behind dispensing a certain amount of this poison gas weapons is to frighten the West from taking some kind of an action. Because when you talk about using poison gas, you're talking about the most horrendous methods of killing people in warfare. I also stated earlier that the Iranians, who are using the Syrians and the Hezbollah as proxies, I think are also trying to introduce to the West the idea that they want to see if they can get away with using chemical weapons for the future. And actually, it's going to backfire on them. It's going to bring in the West and put a stop to them. But this is the reality of the situation.
Okay.
Every time the Syrian regime has used weapons of mass destruction against the anti-Assad forces, the Assad forces always claim it's the opponents.
Okay, well, let me get Mr. Tarpley in. Mr. Tarpley, interesting what Mr. Kaplan has just said. He says every time that the regime of Bashar al-Assad has used chemical weapons, but we saw even earlier a representative from the United Nations, Carla DePonte, who went in there and actually said that she saw no signals that the Syrian government had used the weapons. However, quite likely that it was coming from the insurgents. So your take on all this, sir?
Right.
Well, to me or to
of course,
Mr.
it's claim and counterclaim, but in the middle of this, there is no proof on the side of the people who want to blame Assad. Here in the United States, about 2 months ago, we had the Obama administration concluding with great fanfare that Assad had used chemical weapons, and they said they had proof. Well, we want to see it. The days are long gone when you can get away without that. Let me just put this in perspective, though. I've just been walking by the White House. We had the Martin Luther King Day demonstration. There was a meeting of the National Security Council going on. Are they going to bomb